Welcome. I'm Tobias from Musikfestival Bern, and I'm here with Björn Schmelzer. Welcome, Björn.
Thank you so much.
Great to meet you. You are the founder and the artistic director of the Ensemble Graindelavoix, and you're a preeminent ensemble for early vocal music. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the ensemble, basically, and what your focus is?
Where to start and where to end. We are a little bit focused on these early repertoires. I also don't know really why. I guess it's something that you're stuck with. One moment you are just touched by something, and mostly when you are touched by something is because you don't know why you are touched. It's like, and that keeps you also engaged with it. The thing is never solved this problem. So I guess there is some repetition drive there to be stuck with these early materials and to see something in them, like a sort of, I don't know, maybe a virtual layer or something that you cannot grasp. And if you hear the music performed, you think, but why is it performed like that? Why can you not do it differently? How is the engagement to these old repertoires also always speaking about the performers themselves? Because this is something that fascinated me from the start, that with music, of course, you're always somehow biased. You're always engaged as a performer. The bias is the condition for the performance of this music. So why often in early music do performers try to eliminate themselves or play the game that they are not really there, that they're just mediums for a higher cause or something? So what me from the start interested, like, what is the participation, the essential participation of the performer? Not so much the idea that the performer is everything, not a kind of like the sort of that you have to decide everything as a performer, but more that you're always somehow involved in the negotiation with these repertoires, these very old repertoires, some 500 years old, some older, and that it's thanks to you or in spite of you as a performer that this music lives, that it can be there. So this is a sort of paradoxical situation, something dialectical that absolutely interests me. This entanglement with the repertoire and the fact that you can never eliminate yourself. On the contrary, that in fact, the more almost you get into a sort of subjective relation to this music, the more it becomes really interesting, and it becomes also really universal. So that's also paradoxical. The more you take distance to these repertoires, like they're very old, so the danger of monumentalizing them is very big. It's really a danger, and because you monumentalize them, the distance becomes very big, and as a listener, then you ask yourself, why is this repertoire so far and so distant and so maybe so cold and so not moving you somehow. So but then the more you are engaged in it, of course, the more you as a subject are busy with his music, and the more it seems also to be slipping away the repertoire. So I tried to negotiate these things, and I started Graindelavoix with some partners in crime. It was a little bit a weird approach, as you maybe can already feel from what I'm telling you, and I found like 20 years ago, more or less, this kind of compagnon de route, you can say, with whom I started this adventure, and we are still doing it. We are still busy with it, and I don't say that we are getting better and better, but somehow we get maybe indeed like we get to a certain profundity, of course, by working so much with this repertoire. So. And well, I'm not surprised, and I'm even honored and happy that like a festival like Bern, which is not at all an early music festival, that we are asked. I'm super glad, because I think that we are made for a public that is not a so-called specialist early music public, but for a public who is just curious, people who want to discover new things, not only in the present and in the future, or a projection of the future, but find them back in time.
Yes.
For me, the past is a reservoir of unthought, unheard, undiscovered treasures. Often, sometimes they are as traumatic as contemporary stuff, and that's what I want to show to and share with an audience.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, you're exactly right. The festival in Bern is. I'm sometimes asked when we have old music, or even just music from the Baroque era that we're sometimes programming, or romantic music. how is that contemporary? And I always tell people that, you know, there's always been music that's been at the forefront of, you know, engaging with its time, with the societal rules. And you write very eloquently about this idea that we sometimes, I think you called it, idolize these old works or these old masters as like somehow like from a different time that didn't play by the same rules, and they have this pristine quality of, you know, perfection and almost like, you know, almost like encased in amber, and then we stylize these as something very clean and very pristine. And I think what we're doing at the festival is very much in this idea that there's always been contemporary music, not just today. There's always been music that's basically been challenging to the audience at that time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I would even go further. It's not only just that there is contemporary music in the past for the contemporaries at that time. I think we should go much further. I think the past is our contemporary music. It's so why is that? Because you can say the contemporary is very strange for ourselves. It's very hard to understand what's really happening today. It's not only in politics, it's also, let's say, in a sociological level, on an artistic level. I think artists nowadays, contemporary artists, they make, in fact, their works for a future public. What people now are doing is absolutely necessary because it's the past for the future, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So I see the past in the musical past in the same way. I think that music of the past is made for us today. So it's basically not made for its contemporaries. I think this is a sort of weird historicistic, almost like commonsensical idea. People think, of course, music was made for its own time, but why would that be? I think it's very hard to capture, and people with antennas that really understand what's going on right now. I think there are almost no people like that. This is like, so it's only after the facts, you can say in the Nachleben or the afterlife of repertoires. And when, in fact, as Proust said that very, very beautiful somewhere, a work of art needs to die a first time in order to live as an artwork. So it needs to die, it needs to get rid of its so-called functionalism, it needs to get rid of all the, let's say, the misunderstandings that mostly are, piled up in the contemporary to reborn, to be reborn, you can say, as a work of art that we could really engage with. And so maybe this is more a Hegelian idea, the idea of also this afterwardsness of the past. So I love a lot this idea that it's only through the contemporary that we understand what's going on in the past. It's only through contemporary music and to, let's say, the idea of the modern liberation or emancipation of the dissonant, let's say, that we understand how this was already the core game in very early repertoires. And I think one of the programs we will do, the opening program, has this contradiction or paradox. It's all music from the late 14th century, so-called ars subtilior music, and it's absolutely contemporary music. And it's very interesting that in the beginning of the 20th century, you can say on the verge of modernism, you can say, musicologists thought this was complete crazy repertoire that you could not even perform. They thought this was just mathematical games, not for the ears, by scholastic composers. And it's in fact only with the breakthrough of modern music and contemporary music that we understand that the modern has always been there. Yeah. And so I love this reversal of time, not that that so-called we go back and we understand where we come from. No, it's now that we understand only how the past has been, in fact. And it's through the contemporary, you can almost say that it's clear that these composers from the 14th century have listened to Schoenberg and after, because how could they ever have written this? So I love this idea almost as a kind of mind game to reverse the past, in fact, or to reverse the time, let's say.
Yeah. So at the festival, you're presenting 3 different programs within 5 days. And you mentioned the first one where you're performing music from the ars subtilior era. Then you're playing a concert with the music with the Tenebrae responsories by Carlo Gesualdo. And you're also presenting work by Brumel, which is historically situated somewhere in between the two. How do you approach performing music from spanning an era of 200 years within such a short time. Is it a similar approach to everything because the approach is now, or are there different ways that you have to treat each piece?
Yeah, that's a good question and a very complicated one. I think we can almost not, well, talking about that would take us maybe even too far and would bring us to very complicated reflections maybe. Like, of course, a lot of what you do as an artist, it's not musicology work. I think there is also this misunderstanding that that performers are like the illustration, they bring just illustrations of what musicology discovers, you know. For how I see it is more that you have musicology working, doing super crucial and important work, and then you have musicians who in fact work in the gaps of the research of these musicologies. In fact, I like it a lot that musicologists like have these kind of statements about Gesualdo. He was crazy, he did this crazy music, you know, this the Tenebrae responsorias, almost the swan song of this crazy composer in recluded in his castle there, yeah. Like a sort of mad composer, also in the verge of later Renaissance mannerism and the early Baroque, let's say. So this guy had no place in time. No, it was a figure that, like, so that's one thing. But then you go to look at the music and you don't try to per se alter this image, but you try to open it up. Maybe you try to show, like, first of all, okay, maybe you need craziness to make great art. I don't know, but maybe the guy was not that crazy. Let's say, like, let's show that his music has an internal logic and an intrinsic operative, let's say, drive that is absolutely consistent with the text that he tries to express and articulate, with the idea of this Tenebrae responsoria in the liturgy and so on. It's not the idea that we try to make it again liturgical, but it's in fact to show that that the repertoire itself has almost also a kind of subjective potential. And what I want to say with that is that, okay, you have this composer, Gesualdo, he lives in his own time, and he's a kind of weird figure that nobody can place. But at the same time, this music itself has a sort of subjective life on its own that is hard to stitch sometimes together with the biography of such a composer. Gesualdo is a composer who is strange in his own time, but his repertoire is also in another way strange with his own time, not in the same way than the composer himself. So what we try to do is, how could we make that audible to an audience of today? So it's not a question of trying to show how the 17th or beginning of the 17th century was. It was, in fact, to show how works of art always also jump out of their own time in a way. It's not that they are particularly, especially modern, but that they have a no place or something. I love that idea that that they don't belong anywhere a little bit. And what I think for me, it's also what an artist is doing in his work. It's like an artist in general is often a person who doesn't really know how he belongs to the time era in which he or she is born. And you get then also that he or she tries to negotiate with this problem in the works of art. And so these works of art are also like a sort of Fremdkörper. And I think this is absolutely transhistorical and universal. So it's not like, oh, if you don't know the 16th, 17th century, you will not really understand this music. I think it's on the contrary. The music itself jumps out of its own historicity and gives you the key to get to something that was really what was keeping these people at that time busy. Yeah. And I think that's something that is transhistorical, in fact.
Yeah, I agree. And I also agree as an educator. I always try to basically say that art mediations, the goal of art mediation has to be not to tell people the facts or instruct people to understand how it was, but actually to give them permission to experience the piece on its own terms and on their own terms in their own time. So
absolutely, Maybe just one thing to say, it's like I love a lot that you read music history, for example, and you get all the evidence of the time. And then you have these works of art, you have these music pieces, and you experience the gap itself in history. You start to hear holes in history, and I think to make the whole audible, that's almost, I think, our aim, like that you end up with more questions than answers, and that you in fact have no idea how this time was stitched together or something. So, and I think it's an absolutely needed work in these times of today, to the historical, let's say, evidence we think we have or something.
Yeah. You know, the word crack pops up a lot, no pun intended. It's a word that I've seen you in the manifesto that you have on your website, but in interviews that I've read with you. You even say that polyphony itself opened up a crack. It's as if it opened up a crack in its time, in culture and even in nature. How do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting because people always think of the past and the music of the past as a kind of like harmony of the spheres. Everything was consonant and so on. I think polyphony is the big rupture here. And I think if you look at the history of polyphony, well, you can trace it back to, in written forms at least, to the 11th, 12th century. It's exactly the time when early humanism in Paris and in the cathedrals appeared. I think also a Gothic cathedral, it's a nice symptom, I think, of such a cracked perception of reality, of nature. It's absolutely not something that is built organically. It's very unorganic, and it's absolutely also, I would say it's almost really a rupture with a sort of harmonious, organic perception of reality that was before. If you compare a Romanic church with a Gothic church, it's very clear, I think. Romanic churches are still based on antique models, are symmetric and so on. Gothic churches, they are, you can say they are potentially infinite. You can always build another thing. The towers of Gothic churches are always also asymmetric. So I love a lot that idea that it's not only today that we are confronted with chaos or with dissonance or with rupture. I think this was a problem that was, in fact, already from very early times, from the Middle Ages, conceptualized. And I think it's an interesting thing because it may be something really necessary, because I don't believe so much in the, and that's also maybe the thematics of your festival is also very ambiguous about that, roots and so on. Can we go back to roots? Is that an interesting perspective? I would like to save or redeem the past without this fantasy of going back to the roots, in fact. I think what we find in the past is absolute derootedness, in fact, and absolute rupture. And the artistic conceptualization also of this rupture. And for me, polyphony, if you see how much it was condemned from the early medieval times, it was in fact really a sort of crisis repertoire, and it was always on the verge of blasphemy and like cutting with the orthodoxy of a symbolic order of a time, the normativity. So I see it also as a really anti-normative repertoire, in fact, and I think there is a lot historically to make such a claim. In fact, I wrote a little bit about that in some books and articles, but it's something that maybe is even underdeveloped. So I think that polyphony was not so much harmony of the spheres and trying to bring some kind of paradise now idea. On the contrary, I think it was a sort of a consciousness of our alienation, of our deep alienation, and in fact our deep derootedness. And well, the whole idea, even in theology, of incarnation, for example, God that becomes man and so on, the whole idea of Christianity there, it's a quite revolutionary idea. Yeah. And it's sometimes forgotten. And I think what we try to do with these repertoires is also showing that there is something really shockingly revolutionary in this music, for example, from the 13th, 14th century.
Yeah. So the third concert that we haven't touched on yet is called Rolling Stone. And there you are performing the Mass et Ecce Motus by Antoine Brumel. I just read earlier today that there are 4 times as many ecological catastrophes as there were 50 years ago. So we are living in extraordinary times, and it's very interesting to ask what can music that was written basically in response to an earthquake tell us about that today. But then it would be mistaken to think that we're living in exceptional times, according to what I hear you say, because the people in 1500 also lived in extraordinary times and were responding to their own time. So how is that this kind of atemporality or out of its timeness that you are speaking about?
Yeah, what you say is interesting because it could lead to sort of pragmatism about, l'histoire se répète, so we cannot do anything. It could make us also like a little bit, like all too pragmatic to do something. And so there is a danger there also. But I think also you talked about to which earthquake is this mass responding. Well, in fact, it's this earthquake that was in the Bible that was connected with the resurrection of Christ. So you could almost say it was a sort of ontological earthquake. It's about the earthquake. It's about the fact that, well, the grave is empty. That's what happens. No, the stone rolled away, made this huge, and it's very interesting that also in the Bible, the resurrection is not a visual experience. Nobody saw ever anybody resurrect. So it is a question of belief. And these I find very fascinating. And so what Brumel did, in fact, was, well, there are two elements, in fact. There is the element of Brumel, who composes a kind of, almost a kind of, programmatic work avant la lettre, because you really get a sort of ostinato, a continuous repetition, rolling stone that you hear all the time in this 12-voice incredible work. So there is a sort of programmatic element in it, and you get almost like a musical earthquake somehow expressed. But on the other hand, what interests me a lot is that the mass was recuperated or rediscovered by another composer 50 years later, 60 years later, namely by Orlando di Lasso. I don't know if you read that in my text. So it was in around 1566 or 68, more or less, that Orlando di Lasso retranscribed this mass, who was a lost piece. It was a piece for 12 voices, which was Brumel made that in the beginning of the 16th century. And it's very interesting that the time when he rediscovered it was the time of iconoclasm. It's a sort of cultural earthquake, you can say. It's the time when, through religious wars and so on, people thought that you cannot represent the divine and so on. There is idolatry. So they started to break down churches. Imagery was, destroyed. Artworks were destroyed. It's wonderful to see, wonderful and also shocking how, for example, in Antwerp in 1566, the day after these iconoclasms, the artists came to really collect the broken pieces of their paintings, of their retable, of their artworks, and it must have been a huge trauma for the good and for the bad. So it's not that we have to judge that. It's like, okay, we wash away this feudal past, let's say, this past of mass repression of the people and so on. But at the same time, okay, with what are we replacing it? And then they paint all these cathedrals white, and you get this empty void where there is nothing anymore there. And I find that very interesting. And so you get a mass who was rediscovered as an answer to a cultural earthquake. I like also a lot that natural disasters and cultural disasters, mostly in the history of humanity, go hand in hand. It's really, really hard to disconnect if this is a natural disaster or a cultural disaster. Is this through human hands? Is it purely a kind of natural phenomenon and we should trust Mother Earth, as some people say to me, I think it's all too optimistically. And I love when artists for example, also in the 16th century, but there are people doing this now again, try to respond to that. And they don't really give concrete answers to it, but they open up a field of complexity, I think, of thinking the problem of natural disasters. And for example, the idea that we are already always in disaster. We are already always in crisis. It's hard to get rid of a crisis because it would imply that there would be an harmonious time without crisis. I think this is a lesson that we could learn from these composers and these artists from the 16th century. It's like as if they were so much in the daily shit that they know there is no possibility to get out of it. So it's maybe better to deal with it on a daily basis and to make artworks about it and transform them in something, let's say, positive or whatever you want to call it. In a maybe that's also interesting that the only field I think where disaster and ruination can be affirmed in a strange way is in art, exactly. And that's something that these composers of the 16th century discovered for the first time. Maybe that's why you can call them modern also in one way or another. And that's why I think it's super important to go back to that time, not because these people are pre-modern and they didn't yet, they were still in a time where they lived all in peace and happiness. No, I think they were with 2 feet in their own shit, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what makes them absolutely contemporary.
Yes. I think one writer that I read called Carlo Gesualdo in one way like the preeminent composer of pain, or like a chronicler of pain.
Who said it? Sorry, I didn't.
I don't remember where I read it. It was in some article.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I think pain is the basic material for artists because it can be transformed in art. That's something incredible. Like that, all the negative and all the ruins. Why are ruins so interesting? Because why is a cathedral so interesting? Because it builds its own ruin. Is one of my claims. I think that Gothic art is the construction of destruction. In fact, it constructs holes and it dematerializes the stone. It's an incredible idea, in fact.
Yeah.
So well, it's very dialectical, and I think it's something absolutely contemporary.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, wonderful. So there's lots more to discover, of course, but we are running out of time. To end, I just want to maybe give a brief overview of your activities at the festival. So on Wednesday, September the 6th, there's going to be the opening concert where you're playing the pieces from the Ars Subtilior period. Then on Friday the 8th, there's the performance of the whole Tenebrae responsories. We should also maybe mention that this music was written for the Holy Week, right? And it's written for the days leading up to Easter, and you're performing the whole thing in one go.
In 4 hours, we will do
in 4 hours. So
and we make the public accomplish our partner in crime in that. So we go together in the same trip somehow.
Yeah, amazing. And then on the last day of the festival, on Sunday the 10th, you're performing the Rolling Stone concert, which is Brumel's Missa, together with electric guitar and wind instruments that are woven into the piece.
And starting with a very interesting film also, maybe the documentary film, which we adapted a little bit to which will bring the public absolutely into another world, and at the same time, the same world as that we live in, I think.
Yeah. And so on Thursday, the 7th, finally, there's going to be the opportunity to visit one of your rehearsals, and there will also be an opportunity to talk with you about your work and ask questions. So thank you very much, Björn, for taking the time. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing you in 3 weeks.
I'm looking forward too. I'm very happy to be there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.